Hello, listeners, and welcome to today's Cult News. It's the 2nd of April 2023, and today I am reporting on a recent media piece that has been generating a lot of buzz in recent weeks. In anticipation of the upcoming Netflix documentary, Waco, American Apocalypse, newspapers such as The Mirror had headlines like Waco Massacre cult leader David Koresh told men to be celibate but slept with their wives. And The Sun had headlines like, I survived Waco cult siege 30 years ago, but here's why I believe David Koresh was not a paedophile. And The Daily Star with headlines like, cult leader in new Netflix doc told men to be celibate while bonking their wives. I began wondering, have these newspapers had early access to this limited series? Airing on the streaming giant from March 22nd, 2023. And if so, what is depicted in this documentary for these things to be the biggest takeaways of the series? Perhaps these were just sensationalized headlines that we have become all too familiar with in regards to journalism, selling papers, getting views, and clickbait. However, after watching the 3-part series, I had bigger worries than these. Waco, American Apocalypse is a 3-part docuseries that details the events of the 51-day standoff between the Branch Davidians and the ATF and FBI, after a failed attempt at executing a search warrant took place. The warrant was issued so agencies could confirm whether or not a mass arsenal of weapons was being stashed on the property. The Branch Davidians were an offshoot of Seventh-day Adventism who had seen many changes in leadership, and the most significant shift being when David Koresh began spouting prophecies of doomsday and the need for the group to arm themselves against the rest of the world and the end of the world. On April 19th, 1993, the siege came to a tragic end when the entire Mount Carmel compound burned to the ground with barely any Branch Davidians surviving the fire. A total of 82 lives were lost throughout the entire ordeal, with David Koresh dying inside the compound after it was set ablaze. As promised, there is never-before-seen footage of the events that took place over those 51 days within the Netflix documentary. What surprised me is that this is pretty much where the series starts. There's no context or preamble, really, nothing to help the viewer understand just how we got to this place to begin with. It's only in episode 2, strangely titled Children of God, that we begin to learn about who Vernon Howell was, the wayward stranger who showed up at the doors of the Mount Carmel Center and eventually seized control of the Branch Davidians. We learn little to nothing about the slow indoctrination of followers under his reign, the impoverished conditions people lived in with limited power, food, or fresh water. We hear men talk about how Howell, who renamed himself David Koresh, began sleeping with their wives after he ordered the rest of the husbands to be celibate. This, I assume, was the inspiration for some of the distasteful headlines mentioned at the start of this segment. What I do not understand is how we got to that point in the first place. I don't think it is typical for men outside of high-control environments to allow other men to dictate the nature of other people's marriages and covet other men's wives, which, of course, is against the 10 Commandments. How do we expect viewers of true crime content to change their perceptions on the types of people who join cults if this is what we are seeing? It goes from zero to mass shootouts with government agencies. There are victims of Koreshes who speak in the documentary and offer sympathetic, even supportive sentiments of the now deceased cult leader. Where are the experts to explain to viewers that individuals are groomed, coerced, and manipulated in such ways that even decades later, the control, the hold, and the effect of abusers can still have a tight grip, even if that leader is no longer alive? We hear nothing about Koresh's fight for leadership against the then matriarch leader Lois Roden's son, who went up against Koresh for role of head of the Branch Davidians. The pair both agreed at one point to a resurrection challenge, and whoever could raise someone from the dead would have the right to prevail, where Koresh called authorities and had the man arrested for illegally exhuming a body. I do believe any coverage on the subject of coercive control and cults can serve a purpose, and it is important to remember historical events that took place because of the lack of education or action in our world, especially around extremist religious groups. However, this documentary just could have been so much more. The impact and education could have been so much more. I found myself in tears at the sight of the burning building when no children emerged. The list for those who died in the fire contains the ages of the victims, and this too invoked a strong emotional response. Reading that pregnant women, babies, infants, children, adults died in the fire from smoke inhalation was devastating. Of course, we never want anything like this to happen again. The essence of the documentary told me one thing. The members of the Branch Davidians were let down, and it cost them their lives. David Koresh failed his followers as a leader. The government failed these people as their supposed protectors and enforcers of the law. The responsibility lies with both parties. There will always be opposing views on who set the fires, on whether the government had the right to this siege, to whether David Koresh brought it onto himself and therefore his followers. But something that is not considered, which should outweigh everything else, is that there are people who did not survive this tragedy. The victims who were exposed to the harshest and most crippling forms of coercion, and how each and every one of those individuals was failed. That is my take on the recent Netflix documentary, Waco, American Apocalypse. It's available on Netflix today. Let me know if you've seen it. And what are your thoughts? I'll be back tomorrow with more news. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.